Reading books is scarce in the modern age. Think about how many people in this past week alone you've seen physically read a book. And now from those people, how many of them were guys? In the modern age, reading has so many different ways to be experienced. Compared to the early 2000s, we have audiobooks, ebooks, physical copy paperback books. You can read a book on your watch if you care. But the thing about books and how it's always been is that when it comes to guys and girls, girls are naturally drawn to books, mainly because writing is inherently a more feminine thing with the whole creative aspect. Now with guys, it's always been something that interests me and how they can still read books. I remember back in elementary school, me and my group of friends who were into sports really, we did competitions on how fast we can read each Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. That was a decade ago by then. But looking at it now, books are still the meta in 2025. And I'm here to explain just why men specifically don't read books as much as they realistically should. In 2025, books are still the meta because they have so much learning information. How do I know? Because I've read tens of 20 books just from the past month alone, and I've learned so many different facts about the world that I would have never done had I just researched it the normal way, like most people do. How many people in your own life, including yourself, had read a book in the past month? This video is aimed towards an audience mostly predominantly male because checking my YouTube analytics, it's that, but it's also aimed for people who genuinely have an interest towards books. And we're seeing why men and just people in general don't read as much as they should. And to understand that, we need to look at the first point that comes with it. I don't know if that's a good one. Let me redo it. With each passing day, time becomes more and more evident. Reading books is a long-term process that most people, including men, just don't take in. Most guys I know find books a weird thing to follow. It takes forever to read, and you can instead spend that time either going to the gym or looking into sports and whatnot. The issue ignoring reading is that it always results in some sort of dilemma. You're not learning as often as you should, and your mind stagnates at a point. I remember at a time where I stopped reading just because I felt the action to be boring, and it was by far some of the most mundane life experiences I had, which is interesting. Reading seems like something not attractive to most people, and yet from my own experience, reading is genuinely fun. To understand how we can change this idea of time, you need to truly change the belief. The reason why men aren't reading as much is because their belief system of the time doesn't add up to what they could do. Books take forever to read, and I plan to make a video on how to explain books much more thorough and how to read them faster. But to understand this whole belief, we truly need to change it to not thinking there's so much less time, but instead really just we need to change the belief that time isn't the problem, and rather we can do it in between areas. Why don't you pick up a book? If you're a guy yourself, that's the big question you need to figure out. Why don't you pick up a book now and not delay the fact later? To understand where that comes from, it truly needs to be that belief. Why can't you do it? To understand why can't you do it, you just need to pick up the book and start reading. It's easier than it sounds, and to get up from your seat to do that, you need to move on to step number 2. It's really just changing the process. The process of reading takes ages to do, and to find the right books, you need to figure out the difference you want to go for. The reason why men aren't reading as much is because there's this whole idea of needing to read all these types of books, whether it's romance to science fiction. It really depends on you, but to understand it truly, you need to understand the purpose of reading. Why are you reading in the first place? You either do it for fiction novels, fiction, or non-fiction. It's really starting between each of those, and to find your balance, figure out what you need as a creative person. Figure out if you want to read a story that can change lives, so you become a better storyteller, or you can read something about self-improvement like cooking or exercising and to see where that works in those fields. From there, you need to look at just where it works in both ideas as well as just creation in general. Understanding the difference between fiction and nonfiction is pretty easy. It's all about figuring out if you want to tell a story that's not real or a story that isn't a story that's primarily just for information. These videos are informational and educational for you to learn, but it's also a good pinpoint out there to say to go out there and to make something worth it. Now, the final point of why men aren't reading as much is the big idea of judgment. As much as I argue reading is the meta, to this day, the idea that judgment and how people, specifically the way guys are seen, is not in the best light, because judgment from others is what comes from it. Reading is something not seen positively by most guys due to its inherent feminine nature. But I disagree completely in the idea of judgment. You have so much time to read a book and to pick it up to some degree. With how much information you have from here to there, you can do whatever you want with that information in mind. To understand the importance of a book, it's just truly picking it up, not having a high school teacher do it, and to not be an idiot and back out of what you're doing. I know that I've continued to miss out on stories because I don't want to pick up the book, but it's really that damn book that's the problem. I don't care if I insult you about it, you're not reading as much as you should. And it really is just that fear of judgment. And that goes all the way back to this idea of your belief. To change it and to say books are important. Now, to understand and wrap up this final basis, the reason why men aren't reading as much is mainly for the time, the process, and the judgment. All these in mind help center why books aren't as processed as much as they should. And yet, to this day, they have the biggest longevity I've seen out of any piece of media, no matter what kind you want. You read books to learn, get better at a craft, to make more money, to make more gains, to do anything in this world. All you gotta do is just pick up a book. And if you don't know where to get started, check the top link of the description to read my first book, and it will give you tens of ideas of what to do. Even if it's a fiction novel, for a guy like you out there, you can do so much more in between to figure out what works and what doesn't. When all said and done, books will continue in your process of learning. To read more and to get better at your craft, that's what you want. Yes, making money and making the gains are great in their own right. And once I explain how those work in between this process, you'll understand why I'm so successful as is. But for now, to understand where you're going as a guy, start reading in whatever field you want. It's really looking into the details of fiction, nonfiction, and posting about it, so that lack of judgment isn't as bad. To share out this idea of reading, that's what it takes. Change the process, trust the process, and change the judgment. And once you figure all that out, you'll be a reader before you know it. Thanks for watching. If you want to check out my other socials, they're down there below, along with my second book if you want to help. Until next time, take care.